You people don't belong here." The voice, sharp as shattered glass, belonged to Cordelia Blackthorne. It sliced through the joyful murmur of the wedding reception, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. "You have no right to hold this event in this neighborhood." The man she was screaming at stood perfectly still. His wedding tuxedo was torn and stained, smeared with what had once been a magnificent cake. Behind him lay the ruins of the happiest day of his life. Tables lay overturned, their white linens bleeding wine. Floral arrangements were trampled into the grass. Guests, moments ago celebrating, now huddled in small, frightened groups, their wedding finery a stark contrast to the ugliness that had just invaded their celebration. Yet Maximilian Sterling's voice, when he finally spoke, was unnervingly calm. A quiet fire burned in his eyes, a deep certainty that suggested this woman had just made a terminal mistake. "Ma'am," he said, the word edged with steel, "I strongly suggest you reconsider what you are about to do." But Cordelia Blackthorne was adrift in a sea of her own making, far beyond the reach of reason. Her face was a mask of rage as she brandished her phone. "I'm calling the police," she shrieked. "They'll drag you and your ghetto friends out of here." She pressed the phone to her ear. When the dispatcher answered, her voice shifted, becoming a caricature of theatrical desperation. "Hello? Yes, there's a gang gathering at my neighbor's house. They're threatening me. I think I saw weapons. You need to send every unit you have right now." As the first distant siren began to wail, a knowing look settled on Max's face. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He knew something Cordelia didn't. She had no idea of the forces she had just set in motion. She had no idea who she was truly speaking to. And as those police cars screamed closer, everything was about to change, not just for her, but for everyone watching. To understand how a day of love descended into a scene of such destructive hatred, we must go back 3 months to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Maximilian Sterling was simply a man in love, planning a future with the woman of his dreams. At 32, Max had already reached the pinnacle of his career. He was the governor of the state. But you would never know it to see him on that sunny Saturday morning, hauling moving boxes into his new home in the exclusive Magnolia Heights neighborhood. Max was not a typical politician. He eschewed the governor's mansion, avoided security details, and never flaunted his office. The son of a postal worker and a school cafeteria manager, he had built his life on scholarships, hard work, and the firm belief that public service was about people, not power. His fiancée, Vivian Ashworth, was his equal in every way. At 29, she was one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the state, a woman who had also risen from humble beginnings. Her father, a master mechanic, had sacrificed everything to see her through medical school. Max and Vivian had paid for their beautiful new home with their own money, seeking a sanctuary, a private, peaceful place to begin their life together, far from the political circus. But peace was the last thing they would find. In the grand Victorian mansion next door, another life was unraveling. Cordelia Blackthorne, 58, was watching her world collapse. The construction company she'd inherited was hemorrhaging money. Bankruptcy loomed. Her only hope was a lifeline, a crucial meeting scheduled for the following week with Governor Sterling to secure a massive state infrastructure contract. The irony was a bitter pill she had yet to swallow. She had never met the governor. To her, he was just a name on an appointment calendar, her last chance at salvation. When Cordelia first saw the young black couple moving in next door, their obvious success and happiness stirred something dark and resentful within her. She watched from her window as they worked in their garden, their laughter drifting across the manicured lawn, each peal an irritation to her soul. Finally, she marched over, armed with a plate of cookies and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome," she said, her tone a cold assessment. "I'm Cordelia Blackthorne. This is a particular kind of neighborhood. We have standards." Max, ever the diplomat, extended his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackthorne. I'm Max, and this is my fiancée, Vivian. We're happy to be here." "And what is it you do?" Cordelia asked, the question loaded with assumptions. "I'm in public service," Max replied simply. "And Vivian is a surgeon." The disappointment on Cordelia's face was fleeting but unmistakable. These were not people she could easily intimidate. From that day on, her resentment curdled into obsession. Every delivery truck for the upcoming wedding was suspicious. Every note of music from their yard, a violation. In her mind, their quiet joy was a personal affront. As her own financial desperation mounted, so did her hostility. "If I don't get this state contract, I lose everything," she confided in her assistant, oblivious that the man she was counting on to save her was the same man whose life she was determined to ruin. The week that should have been a joyful countdown to the wedding became a trial by 1,000 cuts, each one administered by the woman next door. She blocked a flower delivery truck, telling the driver, "Wrong neighborhood for your kind." She called other vendors, spinning lies about the event being canceled due to criminal activity. The cruelty became deeply personal when family arrived. She cornered Vivian's elderly grandmother at the mailbox. "You people need to learn some respect," she hissed at the frail woman. She blocked Max's foster brother Jeremiah from reaching the front door. "Section 8 housing is on the other side of town," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Through it all, Max remained a pillar of restraint. "We will not let her hate steal our joy," he told Vivian, who was beginning to fray under the relentless pressure. The harassment escalated to vandalism. Under the cover of darkness, Cordelia crept into their yard, tearing down ribbons and uprooting flowers. She began throwing bags of rotting garbage over their fence. The most heartbreaking moment came when Vivian's 80-year-old grandfather arrived. As he walked slowly up the driveway, Cordelia accosted him. "Go back where you came from," she screamed. The old man was so shaken, he nearly collapsed. The wedding planner, Esperanza, who had been documenting the escalating madness, urged Max to call the police. "Governor," she pleaded, still unaware of his true title. But Max shook his head. "We are having our wedding here," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "No matter what." Saturday morning dawned, beautiful and clear. But at dawn, Cordelia began her final assault. She moved through their yard like a wraith, destroying everything she could reach. Ribbons were torn to shreds, welcome signs snapped in two. The ceremony, held in the backyard, was an act of defiance, a beautiful, intimate exchange of vows under a floral arch that had miraculously survived the morning's rampage. But as Max and Vivian spoke their promises, Cordelia's voice rose from her yard, a torrent of shrieks and insults. Then, the breaking point. She scaled the fence and stormed into the reception. Guests scattered as she charged the tables, sending food crashing to the ground. She seized the magnificent three-tiered wedding cake, Vivian's dream cake, and hurled it onto the patio, where it shattered. But the worst was the poison that poured from her lips, a stream of racial slurs so vile that parents shielded their children's ears. "You animals!" she screamed, her face contorted with hate. "I don't care how much drug money you spent." Jeremiah tried to restrain her, but she clawed at him, spitting at the guests. It was then, standing amidst the wreckage of her own making, surrounded by traumatized guests and a devastated bride, that Cordelia Blackthorne made the call that would seal her fate. Her voice on the phone to the 911 dispatcher was a masterpiece of manufactured terror. "There's an armed gang here," she cried. "Guns, knives. They said they were going to burn down the whole neighborhood. I'm in fear for my life." To look upon a wedding, upon elderly grandparents and small children, upon a bride in her gown, and see an armed gang required a soul hollowed out by hatred. While Cordelia spun her lies, Max moved to protect his guests. "Everyone, please stay calm," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "Let's get the children inside." But he knew the danger. He knew that officers, primed to face violent criminals, were on their way. Vivian knelt beside the ruins of her cake, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Her beautiful dress was stained, her perfect day a nightmare. Her father, Benedict, a gentleman who had never known such rage, trembled. 30 years I have lived in this country," he whispered, "and I have never seen such pure evil." Nearby, Jeremiah was trying to comfort the younger guests, his phone held steady, quietly documenting every unhinged word, every piece of wreckage. He was capturing the evidence that would ensure Cordelia's spectacular self-destruction was complete. He had seen racism before, but never anything this brazen, this deliberately cruel. He leaned toward his brother, his voice a low whisper. Max, maybe we should go, before the police get here. You know how this ends. But Max's jaw was set. He shook his head slowly. We're not running. Not from our own home. Not from who we are. The sirens were getting closer, their wail a rising, ominous soundtrack to the chaos. Multiple units. Cordelia's lies about gangs and weapons had triggered a major response. In minutes, Max knew officers would swarm the property expecting a violent criminal enterprise. Instead, they would find the ruins of a wedding, a community fractured by one woman's venomous hate. The wedding planner, Esperanza, moved frantically through the wreckage, trying to salvage what she could, but it was a hopeless task. In 20 years of orchestrating perfect days, she had never witnessed anything like this. The calculated malice, the sheer joy in destruction, it was beyond her comprehension. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the commotion. Some stood in shock, their faces etched with disbelief. Others looked away, ashamed, as if Cordelia's poison reflected on them all. A few, however, watched with a quiet, unsettling satisfaction, and that, perhaps, was the most chilling sight of all. As the sirens crescendoed into a deafening roar, the tension stretched to its breaking point. Everyone felt it, the precipice of a moment that would change everything. The only question was how. The first two squad cars tore into the Magnolia Heights neighborhood, their blue and red lights painting chaotic strobes across the elegant Victorian homes. A third, then a fourth, screeched to a halt behind them. Cordelia's report had worked exactly as she'd intended. The officers emerged ready for war, hands hovering near their holsters, trained to expect armed criminals and drug dealers. Instead, they found a scene that made no sense. Officer Reginald Thorne, a 20-year veteran who thought he'd seen it all, surveyed the scene with profound disbelief. There were no gang members, only elegantly dressed guests huddled in shock. No drug deal, only overturned catering tables and the scattered remains of a formal celebration. The dissonance was so jarring he wondered for a moment if they'd been sent to the wrong address. This wasn't a crime scene. It was as if a tornado had torn through a wedding reception. Before Thorne could process the chaos, Cordelia Blackthorne launched herself toward him, a woman possessed. "Thank God you're here," she shrieked, her desperation theatrical as she threw herself toward the officers. "They've been threatening me for hours. I thought they were going to kill me." The other officers fanned out, their training on autopilot, but their confusion was palpable. These weren't criminals. They were families in formal wear, elderly grandparents in their Sunday best, small children hiding behind their parents' legs. Officer Thorne's gaze shifted from Cordelia's frantic performance to the traumatized guests, his mind struggling to connect the report with the reality. Where were the weapons, the drugs, the violence? "Ma'am," he said, his professional tone edged with doubt. "Calm down and tell me exactly what happened here." Cordelia's finger, shaking with rage, jabbed toward the wedding party. Her performance was a caricature of hysteria. "Arrest them!" she shrieked, spittle flying. "All of them! They're dealing drugs. They threatened to kill me. They said they'd burn down the whole neighborhood. They're animals." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. They saw crying children in the ruins of a celebration. They saw everything except what Cordelia was describing. "Does this look like a gang gathering to you?" one of the younger officers muttered to his partner. But Cordelia was spiraling, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "They don't belong here. This is a respectable neighborhood. Check them for weapons. Check them for drugs." And then, cutting through the noise, through the screaming and the confusion, Max Sterling stepped forward. His tuxedo was torn. His wedding day lay in ruins. His family had been terrorized by slurs, yet he approached the officers with a dignity that was almost supernatural. Here was a man who had just watched his life's happiest moment be desecrated by pure hatred, and still, he moved with the calm authority of someone who knew precisely who he was. "Officers," he said, his voice measured and calm, "I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding." Officer Thorne looked at the tall, composed black man in the ruined tuxedo, and a flicker of recognition stirred in the back of his mind. The face was maddeningly familiar, but in the surreal context of scattered wedding cake and overturned chairs, he couldn't place it. Still, something about the man's bearing, the quiet command in his voice. Thorne had been a cop for 2 decades. His instincts were sharp. This was not just a guest. This was someone important. And then, Like a lightning strike, recognition hit him with the force of a physical blow. His eyes widened. "Wait a minute," he breathed, the words barely audible. "Governor Sterling?" The name hung in the air, a detonation of silence. Time itself seemed to freeze. Every guest, every neighbor, every officer stood motionless, the implications of those two words washing over them. Thorne's hand, now visibly shaking, reached for his radio. His voice was urgent, mortified. "Dispatch, this is Thorne. I need immediate verification of the current location of Governor Maximilian Sterling. Urgent. I repeat, urgent." The radio crackled back, laced with confusion. "Thorne, the governor has no public events scheduled. No security detail. Why do you ask?" Thorne's voice cracked. "Because I'm looking right at him. And we just responded to a 911 call, reporting him as the leader of an armed gang." The silence on the other end of the radio was absolute. The other officers were having their own dawning moments of horror. They'd seen him on the news, at press conferences, but here, covered in cake, in a torn tuxedo? The context was so bizarre their minds had refused to make the connection. Cordelia, however, was lost. She stared, uncomprehending, as the officer's attention shifted entirely away from her. "Governor?" she stammered. "What are you talking about? Why aren't you arresting them?" Slowly the whispers began to ripple through the guests, and then, one by one, the terrible pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Cordelia's mind. Her eyes, wide with a dawning supernatural terror, fixed on Max as if seeing him for the first time. "Sterling," she whispered, her voice lost beneath the frantic drumming of her own heart. "Governor Sterling? My meeting Monday morning." The color didn't just drain from her face. It vanished, leaving her skin a ghastly, translucent white. She staggered back as if she'd been struck. "Oh my God," she breathed. You're the governor, the man I'm supposed to meet, the contract." Max looked at her, his expression unchanged. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction at her unraveling. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet it carried with crystal clarity. "I'm the man you were scheduled to meet on Monday, Ms. Blackthorne. The man whose approval you need for your construction contract, the man you've been calling an animal." The full cataclysmic weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had destroyed the wedding of the one man who held her company's future in his hands. She had hurled racial slurs at the governor. She had filed a false police report against the most powerful person in the state. "No, no, no," she moaned, clutching her head as reality buckled around her. "This can't be happening. I didn't know." But she had. Some part of her had always known. She had simply chosen hatred, and now she was facing the consequences. Officer Thorne's face was pale as information crackled through his earpiece. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, utterly professional. "I need you to step over here. We have to discuss the details of your 911 call." Cordelia stared at Max, her eyes wide with the horror of someone watching their life burn to the ground by a fire they had set themselves. "The contract," she whispered. "Blackthorne Construction, 20 years. Everything." And in that moment, everyone watching knew. Cordelia Blackthorne's hatred had just cost her far more than a wedding. It had cost her everything. The moment she realized who she had been attacking, something inside Cordelia Blackthorne shattered. The arrogant woman who had terrorized her neighbors transformed into a desperate creature, groveling for mercy. "Governor Sterling, please!" she cried, collapsing to her knees amidst the wreckage of his reception. "I didn't know. It's all a terrible misunderstanding." Max looked down at the woman who had spent the morning spewing racial venom at his family. His response was quiet, measured, and utterly devastating. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Ms. Blackthorne. You knew you were attacking a black family. You knew you were using racial slurs. You knew you were filing a false police report. The only thing you didn't know was that it would have consequences for you." Officer Thorne was now methodically documenting the scene, the destroyed cake, the overturned tables, treating it with the gravity of a major crime. Other officers took statements from the traumatized guests, painting a clear picture of sustained harassment. The wedding planner produced photos of decorations vandalized throughout the week. Neighbors reluctantly admitted to witnessing Cordelia's campaign of terror. The evidence was an avalanche: vandalism, criminal harassment, filing a false police report, and, because of the clear racial motive, hate crime enhancements that amplified every charge. "Ma'am," Officer Thorne said, his voice cold and official, "you're under arrest." Cordelia's pleas dissolved into hollow excuses. "I was protecting the neighborhood. I was scared. I'm not a racist." But too many people had heard her tirades. Too many had watched her actions. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the stunned silence of the backyard. Cordelia Blackthorne, the self-proclaimed queen of Magnolia Heights, was being arrested in front of everyone she had sought to dominate. Her humiliation was just beginning. In the age of social media, the story exploded. Wedding guests had been live streaming, and the footage of Cordelia's racist rampage, followed by her arrest, went viral. News vans descended on the neighborhood, their satellite trucks lining the quiet street. The headlines were brutal. "Racist CEO destroys governor's wedding." "Hate crime arrest at governor's home." The ruin of Blackthorne Construction was swift and total. The company's website crashed. Partners fled. Clients canceled contracts. The state contract she had been banking on to save her business was now an impossibility, a permanent monument to her folly. That evening, still in his torn tuxedo, Max Sterling stood before the assembled media. "Today was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives," he said, his voice steady. "Instead, it became a reminder that hate still exists. But it is also a reminder that actions have consequences, and that love and dignity will always triumph." He did not gloat. He simply let the truth stand on its own. Later, Cordelia's mugshot was released. The transformation was shocking. The impeccably dressed woman was gone, replaced by a haggard, broken figure with hollow eyes, the image of someone who had lost everything. In less than 12 hours, her hatred had not only destroyed a wedding, it had incinerated her life, her business, and her future. It had all been so preventable. She had chosen hate, and hate always destroys the vessel in which it is carried. 3 weeks later, Cordelia Blackthorne stood in a courtroom, facing the very real possibility of years in prison. The charges against her read like a litany of a life unraveled: filing a false police report, criminal harassment, vandalism, destruction of property, and hate crimes. 5 to 7 years, her lawyer had warned, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine. The media's attention had been a ravenous, unending storm. Her business, Blackthorne Construction, was a hollowed-out shell, stripped of every contract, every client, every shred of the reputation it had taken a lifetime to build. The woman who once moved through the world wrapped in a cloak of superiority could no longer show her face in public without a stranger's hiss of recognition, the sting of their anger. And then, in the suffocating quiet of the courtroom, the extraordinary occurred. Governor Maximilian Sterling entered, his presence silencing the room. Instead of demanding justice for the woman who had shattered his wedding day and tormented his family, he faced the judge and made a request born of a grace few could comprehend. "Your Honor," Max said, his voice imbued with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "I request that Ms. Blackthorne's charges be reduced to misdemeanors, on the condition that she proves her change through action, not words." A wave of disbelief rippled through the gallery. Here was a man with every right to demand vengeance, every reason to see his attacker buried by the full weight of the law. Yet he was offering a path to redemption. "Her contract with the state will be suspended," Max continued, "pending genuine proof of transformation. She will complete 6 months of community service, specifically in the communities she targeted. She will undergo extensive sensitivity training, and she will demonstrate, through her deeds, that she has truly changed." In the defendant's chair, Cordelia sat frozen, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. The man she had called an animal, whose family she had terrorized, was offering her a second chance she knew she didn't deserve. "I've been so full of hate for so long," she whispered to her lawyer, her voice a fractured thing. "I don't know who I am without it. I don't know if I can change." Judge Patricia Williams regarded them both, her gaze lingering on Max, then settling on Cordelia. "Ms. Blackthorne," she said, her voice firm, "you are being offered a gift of grace that is vanishingly rare. Governor Sterling could have asked for the maximum sentence, and you would have deserved it. He is offering you a chance to prove that redemption is possible. Do not waste it." The first day of her community service was the hardest of her life. She stood before the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center, deep in the city's predominantly black East Side, clutching her court papers like a shield, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But she pushed through the doors and found a reality that shattered the ugly caricatures she had carried for a lifetime. The center was immaculate, humming with the quiet energy of families working together, painting murals, tending a small garden. These were not the monsters of her imagination. They were simply people. The center's director, Dr. Angela Washington, had been wary. One chance, she'd told Cordelia, a single hint of the woman from that wedding, and you're gone. Those first weeks were a trial by fire. She cleaned bathrooms, mopped floors, did whatever menial task was asked of her. Some recognized her, their hostility a palpable force. But day after day, she returned. She scrubbed and served, and for the first time in her life she listened. She heard the stories of James, who'd lost his factory job, of Maria, a single mother working 2 jobs, of Timothy, a teenager trying to stay straight while his father was deployed. These were not stereotypes, they were people, their lives as complex and fraught with hope and fear as anyone else's. 3 months in, Dr. Washington approached her. We're starting a business development program for young entrepreneurs. They need a mentor. You have 30 years of experience. Are you willing to share it? Her first mentee was Marcus Thompson, a 25-year-old with a dream of starting a landscaping business. He was tense at their first meeting, knowing exactly who she was, but his desperation for guidance outweighed his suspicion. To her own surprise, Cordelia found herself impressed by his drive. She taught him how to bid on contracts, how to manage cash flow. She even used her old connections to help him land his first clients. Then came Elena Rodriguez, who wanted to open a catering company. The irony was not lost on her. The woman who once shrieked that these people didn't belong was now pouring her soul into helping them thrive. The true turning point was Destiny Johnson, a 19-year-old single mother who wanted to start a daycare. "Why should I trust you?" Destiny asked, her eyes hard. "You called people like me animals. Now you want to help?" The old Cordelia would have bristled with indignation. Instead, she met the young woman's gaze and spoke the unvarnished truth. "You're right not to trust me. I was a hateful woman. I'm not asking you to trust who I was. I'm asking for a chance to prove who I'm becoming." Together, they built the business plan for Little Dreamers Daycare. They navigated the labyrinth of licensing and secured funding. It became the most rewarding work of Cordelia's life. 6 months later, she stood before Judge Williams again. The courtroom was silent as Marcus Thompson spoke of his now thriving business, which employed 5 people. Elena Rodriguez described how Cordelia's mentorship had turned her dream into a beloved local restaurant. But it was Destiny's testimony that moved the judge to tears. "Ms. Blackthorne didn't just help me start a business," she said, her voice clear and strong. "She helped me believe I deserved to succeed. She proved to me that people can change." Governor Sterling, who had attended quietly, was asked for his opinion. "She has proven through her actions," he said without hesitation, "that redemption is real. She has earned her second chance." The judge reduced the remaining charges and approved the restoration of Blackthorne Construction's eligibility for state contracts. The first project was a new wing for the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center. 1 year to the day after the ruined wedding, Max and Vivian Sterling hosted an anniversary barbecue in their backyard. It was a mosaic of the community, neighbors of all races, friends old and new. And there, in a simple sundress, helping to serve food, was Cordelia Blackthorne. Marcus was there, showing off photos of his work. Elena had catered part of the event. Destiny arrived with her baby daughter, whom she had named Hope. "You know," Vivian murmured to her husband, watching their former tormentor help a little boy reach the dessert table. "Perhaps this is what victory looks like, not destroying your enemies, but helping them become better." Max drew her close. "Hate destroys everything it touches. But love can transform even the most broken soul into something beautiful." As the evening ended, Cordelia approached them. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "Not just for today, for showing me what grace is. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you saved me." Max smiled gently. "We didn't save you, Cordelia. You saved yourself. You chose to do the work." "But you showed me it was possible," she replied. You believed I could be better when I couldn't believe it myself. The story of what happened that year became a quiet legend in their city, a testament that started with an act of hatred but ended in a radical act of grace. It was proof that redemption is not a gift, but a choice, earned through the hard work of change. The wedding that was shattered by prejudice ultimately forged something far stronger, a community where forgiveness could triumph over bitterness and where love could heal the deepest of wounds, one heart at a time.